Hello, beautiful souls. I am Valeria Maritza here at Healing Through You. I am an infinite being of light, and so are you. Today, my guest is Soulla Demetriou. She's a self-compassion expert, somatic practitioner, and transformational mentor. She is amazing at what she does. I am so excited to bring her to you. So let's just welcome her in. How are you, Soulla?
I'm amazing. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and having this conversation with you. So thank you for having me.
Yes, I am so excited to have you here, especially because you work with somatic healing, which is
Mm.
something that has I've been hearing more and more about that on the internet. It's kind of like becoming a trend. I know it's very ancient
Mm.
modality, but let's get started with like how did you get here? How what was your life before? What was your life like before you started doing this?
Mm. That is a big question. And it's such an important one because my life journey, and I think that's probably why we're sitting here having this conversation today,
Mhm.
really infuses and has guided everything that I do. There's
Mhm.
nothing that I offer that hasn't come from me having walked that path myself. And so to start at the beginning would be to go all the way back to really my childhood and a life where I started having very severe anxiety, panic attacks in my teens. As I went into my early 20s, that anxiety continued, and I also experienced like real periods of depression and just struggling really with regulation and by the time it got to, my mid 20s, I had a generalized anxiety disorder, which was, for anyone who experiences anxiety, I'm sure there's an understanding of just how painful and challenging it is to live with constant anxiety. And one thing I'm very grateful for is just something about my kind of spirit in a way that just had a sense of this can't be it. I really had a sense of who I was at my source and what I'd lost through this anxiety and this depression and a feeling of no, I can't accept that this is my life. There's so much I want to be, there's so much I want to do. And
I'm sorry, about what age did you have that realization of like, this can't be it. There must be something more.
yeah, I suppose that was around my mid 20s,
Okay. Mhm.
coming up towards my late 20s, and I started having therapy. And because there'd been a lot of similar struggles in my family, I really felt this sense of, oh, maybe it's hereditary, and maybe this is just what's destined for me. But inside there was like a no, my spirit is strong. I've always been very adventurous, very courageous, very curious. There's always been a lot that I dreamt of doing in my life. And I'm so grateful for that spark in me that set out on a very long path, as it turns out, of not accepting that as my reality and trying to understand how to free myself from the shackles of those very painful experiences. And so I trained first as a massage therapist, then a yoga teacher. And it was really the yoga that opened the doors to a path, which has brought me to where I am today, 15 years later. So 15 years of being in dedication to this journey. And along the way, I launched a retreat company, Soulshine Retreat. So I've now worked with thousands of people. And that's really informed where my journey has gone, both for myself and for others, in terms of how do we really free ourselves and how do we live in a place where we can let our soul shine, really, meet the potential of our spirit in this lifetime, to be who we're meant to be beyond the limitations that can arise because of the experiences that wound us and the protection that arises as a result through our beliefs and strategies that we navigate life. So it's been a long path, and there's so much I could share about it, but it started from a very personal place, and then each step forward kind of opened a door, and then that opened another door, and it took me to the point I am today, where I have this methodology, the Soulshine Way, which I have a book coming out about just in January next year, and that methodology is something I've worked with very personally and with many people to help them also find that freedom. So yeah, a long path indeed.
Yeah, I love the way you're sharing that because it feels like a lot of us go through our childhood and we're just going through the motions of what we have been told to do, right? You go to school, you get your
Mm,
grades, you go get a degree or you get a job, and then you work, and then, whatever it is that we have been fed, like that's what you need to do in order to make it. But a lot of us are like feeling what you just said, like there must be something more than just this. Um, and you said that you've been doing this happened around 15 years ago, like you've been starting to do this. And that's about 2010, which there was a huge wave of people waking up or awakening around 2012.
mm,
So I was like, oh, she matches that part. I mean, I know I'm compartmentalizing you, but like, that part, like that wave of people that just woke up at that time and started
mm,
feeling this and putting two and two together, like there must be
mm,
something more. And I love that you're sharing that because people might be listening to this now and feeling like, yeah, I did all the things my parents told me or whatever, it's whomever told me. And now I'm here and I'm like, is this it? Like, what else is there? So I love how you share the story. Tell us a little bit more about how you listened to that inner voice of like, there must
mm,
be something more. And then what did you do in order to follow that yearning within you?
mm. Yeah, I love that question. I always just had this very strong feeling. Again, something I feel very grateful for is my intuition, what I now know as my intuition.
Uh-huh.
I just always had a very strong feeling. And it was honestly, it was terrifying at times, especially in the beginning to follow that, because I remember I was like on one path and your words just landed so powerfully with me then because I really felt that I went to a certain school and got certain grades and went to a certain university and studied a certain thing to go into a certain career. And it was like I did everything that was sort of meant of me
Mhm.
without ever, the moments where my desire, my values came up, they weren't really welcomed in the environment and the systems I was part of at school and in my family. It was like this is the right thing to do. And so I really had this sense of needing to listen to a feeling, and the feeling told me I had to change and step into the unknown. And that was so hard at the time because it meant turning away from a great career, a great relationship, all these things which on the surface were kind of societally what was expected for me at that time in my life, and to step completely into the unknown. And all I had was a feeling. And that feeling was like, there has to be another way. And I think for me, what activated my courage maybe to follow that feeling is because I was suffering. I was suffering from anxiety. Like the cost of not changing was
Yeah.
too great for me. And often we talk about that, it's sometimes we have to make that change only when the fear of staying the same is greater, when things really become, and so when you're experiencing extreme anxiety and depression, and just such a disconnect from feeling alive and well, I think that helped give me the courage to follow this feeling, because this feeling, even though it didn't offer me any answers, it was something deep and wise within me. And I'm so grateful because I've just come to trust that feeling. And more and more now, I help other people connect to that feeling through practices. So if we're looking for like a tangible way of how do we listen, I would say embodiment practices, meditation, anything that brings us into the language of our body and helps us start to understand it. Like, so we start understanding when those little bubbles arise up from feeling, from sensation, from insight, and we learn to listen. And that for me has deepened and deepened over time. So from listening to the cues of my body, from listening to the feelings, and through to like really now, today in my work, listening to spirit and listening to guidance and letting go of a need to understand any of it. I think
Oh,
that's
I
really
love that.
key. Like, I
Yes.
don't need to understand it. I just trust. And the more you trust, right? the more beauty comes through, and it becomes this sort of self-fulfilling, beautiful prophecy of I can trust and I can listen. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I really love the way that you explained that because, yeah, I mean, that's the type of thing that you can't explain. Like, well, why
Mm,
would you do that? Why would you leave that? And so many people have gone down the deep rabbit hole, have felt something very similar, and it's like I can't explain why. It just is, or I just know.
mm.
And did it seem did it seem like your family or your friends that they've start thinking that you were crazy to let go of all this stuff, start labeling like what's going on with Soulla?
Well, like I say, it was a very difficult time because it was a very challenging time because it was the end of my 20s. And around me, everyone was starting to get married and have children. And it was really that kind of stepping into adulthood. And I was off like packing in my career, packing it all in to go around the world on this quest. And yeah, it was hard. My family. I was actually very lucky that my father had taken a very unorthodox path in his life. He was an immigrant to the UK and he just made his own reality and he was very creative with that. He was a businessman. No one gave him anything. He left school when he was 12. And so he actually was very much like, go for it. My mom on
Amazing.
the other side was terrified, was like, what are you doing? Where are my grandchildren? Why are you giving up your security? And I remember really being in the pain of like, why can't I just follow this path and get married and have children and have this security? And it was like that feeling of no, you have to do something different. So there was a lot of challenge within me and around me, for sure. Yes.
Wow. Okay. So you left everything and you went down your own quest. So is
Mm,
this when you kind of like started to find who you were, who it was that Soulla was, what Soulla wanted, what Soulla was feeling, instead of what I've been feeling, what you've been feeling that society wanted from you?
mm. I feel like the process to actually understanding truly myself had to begin more by understanding the ways in which I was suffering and the root of the anxiety and the depression and the painful inner critic and the beliefs about myself. So I feel that that was almost what came later, but the driver was more, how can I free myself from this suffering? And that those doors definitely opened on that path. I think one of the really pivotal moments for me was because of all the training that I did and the space that I was in, having this realization one day, like, I'm not alone. Like, so many people have the same beliefs as me. And I saw that with the other practitioners that were training and then running a retreat center and working with so many people over the years. I was like, hold on, all of these people, so many of them are also having the same challenges and the same beliefs. And that just got me very curious about why, as humans, we suffer in this way. And I think that's really informed my path a lot, like this curiosity as to why we struggle with these beliefs, with these behaviors, to get into a place of understanding that so we could then also work out how to free, well, myself and ourselves. And so through doing that, ultimately, that helped me understand and come back to who I truly was, but only when I understood what the barriers were first to knowing who I truly was. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about what practices did you engage in to get to that
Mm.
part, to heal the anxiety and the negative self-talk and all that.
I'm so glad you asked that question because I'm very passionate about those methodologies and I'm very grateful for them. I can tell you my path was very much started with mindfulness. So finding that pause between stimulus and response, that was really important, first of all. Like if we're suffering, first of all, we have to notice that we're suffering.
Mm,
And only then can we create a pause where we can learn to respond in new ways. The second step then became about self-compassion. By understanding it was a moment of suffering, I could then respond from a place that was kinder with myself. You know, if you imagine if there's a moment of an inner critic being there or an anxious moment, you have to notice it's happening first in order to respond in a different way. And then from there, came the depth. And that's when a practice called internal family systems came into my life. And this is a psychotherapeutic, somatic practice, that word again. And that was the practice that really changed everything. And with internal family systems, we understand that everyone has something called self energy and everyone has parts. And we all have protected parts and we all have wounded parts. Our protector parts are the parts that evolve through the experience of our life to protect us from feeling the wounds that we often experience when we're young. So, protector might be the inner critic, it might be the perfectionist, it might be the continual taskmaster that keeps us busy, busy, busy. It might be the people pleaser. There's many different ways we can experience that. And the wounds might be around shame or fear or abandonment or rejection. And that practice was definitely, and it continues to be the biggest part of my practice for myself and others in terms of how we understand the way in which our system is developed and how the past is impacting our present. So, how, when we're experiencing our present, are we actually seeing it through the lens of past wounding and adaptations to help us never feel that wounding again?
mm. Yeah, I have heard about the internal family patterns, was it?
Internal family
Systems.
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 Yeah.
Yes, I have heard about that before. Um, and I was very curious about like what is that? Like I
Mm,
haven't dived deeply into that, but I've heard it several times, like from different people who either
mm,
have used it or are practicing like you
mhm.
are or who heal themselves. So I'm really interested in that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what how would someone know that this might be something that might help them? Like how did they come to you? How did you
Mm.
how did you discover it?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting practice because it's quite hard to convey exactly what happens when you do the practice because
Mm.
it's very embodied and experiential. So I don't know, have you seen the movie Inside Out, like the animation Inside Out, where it's the little girl? Well, for those who've seen Inside Out, it's all the little parts inside a girl, like the angry part, the joyful part, the
I did see
hardworking
it.
part. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
that's like IFS. We all have parts inside of us in that way. And we get very curious about the parts that have adapted due to a rupture in a sense of safety in our life. And that's not always an obvious sense of safety. It's not always the way people think. You know, they're like, I had a pretty good upbringing. I didn't go through anything challenging. And yet each of our systems experience life in a way where we can have these ruptures to our sense of belonging, to our sense of safety. And so IFS is, well, it's worth saying it's one of the fastest growing therapies in the world right now. It is so impactful. Many people who have done a lot of other therapy without perhaps reaching the space they hope to are finding real success with IFS. And it's because it's not about just understanding it through your head, understanding your stories and changing your mindset. You actually go deep into the body, into the nervous system, into the places where these parts live, like the perfectionist, the inner critic, all those ones I mentioned before, and many more aside from it. And you meet them and you talk to them and you help them understand that there might be another way to be and it's safe to actually embrace new ways of behaving. It's quite bonkers to describe. And even the first time you do it, people are like, wow, what happened? But it's so powerful because we're not telling ourselves to change. We're actually working with the body itself, the soma, which is the part of somatic, like it's body-based therapy. So you can actually use the body as the portal for healing and transformation. I've worked with, you know, so many people now, from those who've experienced very acute trauma in their life through to those who simply want to evolve and meet their potential. And this practice will meet every single person and will bring something to them because it's all about understanding who you are and what's within you that has evolved from the way your past has impacted you. And all of us have been shaped by our past, right?
Hmm.
Everyone has. It's just some of us have been shaped in a way that means we're carrying a really big weight around with us from the past. And the practice of IFS, internal family systems, is really a practice of freedom because it helps us free our system up and our nervous system up to start living through the present rather than the beliefs of the past.
I love that. Very well explained. It
Thank
feels,
you.
yes, it feels really nurturing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that word is such a great word to use because you can go to the deepest and most painful of wounds
Hmm.
and you meet it in a way that is very nurturing and loving and tender. And so it becomes a very safe and gentle way to do extremely deep work and to meet the most vulnerable parts of ourselves in a way that doesn't feel scary or hard or overwhelming for the system. I say one of the real beauties of IFS is it doesn't re-traumatize. You can't really
Yeah.
re-traumatize a system because the only way the system opens up and lets you meet it is if there's enough of what we call self energy. And self energy, by definition, is loving. So when we're in our self energy, which is the best way to explain that is if you're familiar with the idea of meditation and when
Hmm.
we come into that space when we become the observer of our experience,
Yes.
that's our self energy. It's like the vast blue sky which is always there is our self energy, and then the weather are the experience and the emotions that pass through. So when we connect into this self energy, which we all have, sometimes it feels very distant because our skies are full of weather and emotions and things. But when we connect from there into our system, it naturally opens up to reveal itself, like almost like a flower that if you give it the right conditions of sun and water, it will open up and show itself to you. And you can get very, very, very deep, but in a way that doesn't push and is loving and soft. So that's very powerful for doing deep, deep inner work and getting as deep as you possibly can and changing and transforming your world truly from the inside out.
Lovely. So people are not actually reliving the trauma or the experiences that made them or that brought the illness or the anxiety because they are looking at it from a higher perspective, from a place of love.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Yes. You become, and we call that a system of reparenting.
Uh-huh.
Reparenting ourselves is when we are there for ourselves in the way that we needed. And so when we create the space to come into our self energy, which is this loving, infinitely loving presence, we know we're in self energy when we feel curious, when we feel calm, when we feel compassionate. When we meet ourselves from that place, it's almost like we become the safe, secure, loving adult that we needed in all those moments when perhaps those painful or challenging things happen. And we go and witness them in the way that we needed. And it's through that witnessing that cycles are actually able to end because the trouble, the challenge for many of us is when we have painful experiences in our past, from a nervous system perspective, our body doesn't know they're actually over. They
Mm.
believe that we're still in that place of the 6 year old, the 11-year old that was bullied, the 13-year old that went through a divorce, all those ages. It's like our system gets stuck there. And that's why, as adults, we can be triggered by the same things, even though we're adults now. And so we want to go and witness these parts of ourselves from a loving place, this loving self energy. And in doing so, it's like we can close the chapter and we can actually move forwards in our life rather than dragging the past around with us everywhere. Does that
This
make
is,
sense?
yeah, totally. Like I'm envisioning, I'm like, oh, those are I'm looking at like I'm seeing like people, adults who get angry really, really quickly or who have like who are
Mm,
fighting, just because they're driving, like somebody got in front. That's not them, that's the trauma. of, or what happened when they were younger, that's
Hmm.
repeating itself in adulthood.
Hmm.
And there's just all
Yes.
of this fighting of not being able to see each
Hmm.
other's perspective or points of view, but it's
Hmm.
all like, oh, I'm being attacked type of thing.
Yeah, exactly that. And what happens is when you have these kind of behaviors, it could be like anger, it could be very, very critical, it could be like I often come to perfectionism, because I think that's one so many people relate to. What we get curious about is what is this part of us believing
Hmm.
right now? What is it fearing? And what is it fearing would happen if it didn't do this? So, if we're being a perfectionist, what is the fear of what would happen if we weren't a perfectionist? Or if we're being very angry, what is the fear of what might happen if that anger weren't there? And then that's when you meet the protector. That's the protective part of us. And when we finally understand the protector, like, well, maybe the fear is that if we're not angry, we might be unsafe, or we might be judged, or we might be criticized. And so we're not going to let that happen. And then you start seeing, well, what's the wound? Maybe the wound is rejection. Maybe the wound is shame. Not I've done something wrong, but there's something wrong fundamentally with who I am. Or maybe the wound is fear because maybe we felt unsafe. And then we start understanding in that moment, we might just be driving in the car and getting angry, or we might be frustrated with a team member. We can start being like, oh, actually, what I'm believing here is that I have to be angry because otherwise it won't be safe because I will feel rejection. And that feels life or death for me, because it's really important we understand that these threats, these wounds feel like survival wounds because that's how our nervous system works. And when we understand that, we can start being there for ourselves in a way that's like, it's okay. I'm safe. I'm here. I'm not alone because I'm with myself right now. I'm not that child. It's okay for this to happen. And that is how we start to really shift behavior, not from the mind down, but from the body up, by really letting these parts understand it's safe to embrace a new way of being. And these protectors take so many forms. Addiction, these are protectors. When we're in place of disordered eating, these are protective parts. All of them are working really hard from actually a place of deep love to protect us the best way they knew how. And the job of IFS is to help these parts of us know it's actually safe to try a new way now. Almost thank you for what you've done, and now it's safe to try another way.
Mm, I love that. Um, I imagine also maybe someone who hasn't done this type of work much or is new to it, I should say, they might be just afraid to let go because who
Mm,
am I without all of this?
mm, yeah, well, often that comes up, and when we start using the language of IFS, we always talk about a part. We start recognizing all of this as parts. So
Hmm.
there might be a part that is scared to let go because who would I be without this?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and what we do in those situations, which is in almost every client, is reassure that part that without this, you'll be able to be your true self, the true unburdened version of yourself. Like, who would you have been if you didn't have to, in the past, adapt towards survival or protection, or if you didn't carry a wound? And to go back to your first question or your question earlier on, in the methodology I work with, the sixth step is when we come into connection with our values and who we truly are. And it happens at that point because we have to meet what's underneath the water. If you imagine the iceberg analogy that's often used in
Mhm.
coaching, we have to know what's underneath the water, the foundation, like the iceberg that you can't see, in order to work with what you can actually see above the water, which is the tip of the iceberg. And within that are our values and our truth, because it's only when we feel free within that we can truly express ourselves freely externally in our world. And so, beautiful stage of this healing process is when we recognize it's safe to change. And who would I be if I didn't have to protect in this way? And then suddenly we come home to our true self, that true spirit. What are our values? What really lights us up? Not because someone else has told us, not because society has told us, or not because we've needed to act a certain way to feel safe and well, but because it's who we truly are. And that is just such a big step forward in liberated living.
This is beautiful. Is this work does this work happen like let's say like on a weekly basis, or is this more of an immersion kind of like you mentioned something about retreat, like where people come
Mm,
over? Is this something that people can heal a lot during a retreat, like let's say during a week or
mm.
something, or is this something that goes on like let's say seeing you or someone like once a week or something like that? How does that work?
Yeah, it's so the way I work is I have retreats and I have a deep immersions. So when we do the immersive experiences, that's like 7 days and we go deep into this healing work. And you can certainly do a lot in that space. What I found to be most powerful, and of course, it depends on the system that comes and how much
Mhm.
you've been through, honestly. So it
Yeah.
depends on the intention that you bring. You can get an enormous amount of insight and you can build a beautiful connection in your body through the course of like an in-person experience, and you can shift a lot. But if there's a lot in the system, then I definitely find the most potent combination is to do one-on-one as well, because it's when you do the one-on-one that you get to deeply map your inner emotional blueprint. You know, what are your protections? What are your wounds? What has shaped you? And you start learning what it means to come back into safety. But there's many different paths. My book talks you through this methodology. I have a group coaching program that brings you into it. I have an immersion and I have one-on-one. So each of those offer a different layer of depth. All of them bring value. Of course, I don't believe you can never really surpass doing one-on-one work in terms of depth. It's just the most intimate and bespoke experience. But all of these steps, as with everything in our healing, count. Everything is a step forwards.
Yeah, how do people bring the healing or whatever it is that they work through, either on a one-on-one or during a retreat? How do they bring that healing back to their life?
Mm. So one of the stages in the Soulshine Way is actually integration. And so I
Uh-huh.
really work with people to have tools to integrate the practices and mm, some of those tools or the foundation of the tools of mindfulness and self-compassion. So the mindfulness, because we really need to learn to notice when old behaviors are happening, that pause I mentioned, the pause between stimulus and response and how we respond to them. And so I teach people mindfulness. I'm a meditation facilitator, and I help people really get empowered to notice in themselves when old behaviors, old wounds are coming up, and then armed with all of this understanding about who they are and how they became that way, they then have tools to respond to that, tools of self-compassion and tools of nervous system regulation. So you can start really helping your system understand this is real. This is true. This change is true. Not because I'm telling them, but because within them they are resourcing themselves. They have this sense of self-responsibility, which is so powerful. And then I also teach people embodiment practices. So anything that really brings them back into connection, I try and give people a toolkit so that they can integrate what they learn. And that's the most important thing. I'm not doing this work for people. I am helping people do this work for themselves
Yes.
because that's the most powerful relationship we have. And that's why everything I do is about helping people to transform their relationship with themselves.
Hmm.
Because when that changes, everything changes. In many, many, many small moments, the whole course of our life can shift.
I love that.
Mm,
Beautiful. Wow. Okay. So you went into how you help people a lot, and how you healed yourself from using these methods.
mm.
Um is there anything else that you want to add to that, like in terms of like what you offer or other things that you discover throughout your own healing?
Mm. Oh, there's so much, when you've been immersed in this world for 15 years, and
Uh-huh.
there's so many different things I'd love to share. I suppose for me, the methodology really evolved from my own journey and from supporting others, but I had a very powerful experience. I had a big accident 18 months ago and nearly died, and I
Oh,
actually used the methodology. It was such an interesting moment that felt like a culmination of that methodology because I used my own method to support my healing from the accident in so many
wow.
different ways. So I suppose I just really have such deep conviction about how these practices can support people. And having been through so much trauma myself in my life, I have all the diagnoses, complex PTSD, anxiety, depression. I suppose I just really want to share with people many things, but in particular, one is just like hope. I just want people to really understand if they're in deep pain that things can change and that there's always hope. There's always possibility, and I suppose my other intention is to help people find their way there. When I started on this path, I felt like I had to work all of this out myself. We didn't talk about somatic therapy. We didn't talk about attachment wounding. We didn't talk about the nervous system. No one even mentioned trauma for how many years. And so I really hope that these practices almost shortcut that challenge which so many people can have on their journey of transformation of like, where do I even begin? I don't know if
Yes.
you found that as well. It's like the
Yeah.
desire can be there, but like, where do I begin? And there's so much information now. And
Mhm.
so my hope is, be it someone's very deeply suffering or just looking to keep evolving, to really help them find the practices that can impact and change their life rather than putting all their energy towards finding them. So they can actually get into the business of transformation and healing. Um, and yeah, that's what I'm dedicated to. And I am trying to create as many ways as possible to be impactful in the world and to support people. Like I say, my book's coming out next year. The title is You Have Always Been Enough, because I
I love
think
that.
I thank you.
Yes.
And that was really, if you remember when I said there was a moment I was like, hold on, so many other people have this same challenging belief. I would say that belief is about not being enough, about not being lovable, about not being worthy. And I don't know if you found that in your work as well.
Yeah.
And the fundamental truth on a spiritual human, on whichever way you cut it, that we're all coming back to is remembering the truth of who we are, which is like we are love. We are whole and complete and lovable and worthy. And so that's kind of my mission, to help as many people as possible really come back into that relationship of self-love and inner freedom. And I'm going to have lots of really exciting events to launch the book. So if it does speak to anyone, I'd love to invite them to come and get involved in the community. There's going to be online retreats and book clubs to really help integrate the book's journey. And I'd love to share that with as many people as possible because this stuff works.
I love that. Amazing. So, the book's coming out in January?
That's right. Yeah. So pre-sales, so you can order the book from mid-October. So you can have a link for this podcast, which is very exciting. And then the book actually launches in January. And then all through January and February, I'm going to have a lot of exciting events to get involved with to really understand and integrate the book into your system and life.
I love that. All that support that comes with buying the book. It's not like, here you
Mm,
go and figure it out. I love that you have all of that support attached to it so that you can work with it.
absolutely.
And the book club for people who love book clubs, and
Yeah.
talking about it. That's amazing. I love it.
Thank
Well,
you.
this is amazing. There was another question I was going to ask you, and I just forgot it. So maybe it'll come back to me. This happens to me all the time.
Me too. I know
Oh,
that well.
I know what it was. You talked about the pause.
Yes.
Um, and it just feels like that might be one of the simplest things that maybe we could take
Mm,
from this interview of, beginning to integrate right away or begin to use right away in our lives to
mm,
begin to change what we're doing is to just take that pause
mm.
and come up with something else to respond instead of reacting to what life is
Yes.
giving us.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that. Is there anything more you want to add to that part about the
Yeah.
pause?
So that pause comes from a very famous quote by, well, it was attributed to Viktor Frankl, and I use it. Everyone who's worked with me knows the quote about between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that is the quote. And so I invite everyone to start noticing when something happens that's maybe painful or has struggle in it, to pause and to recognize that's happening. And then in that moment, we can do what's called a self-compassion quickie, which is just ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I need? And how can I be with this in the most loving way right now?
Mm.
Sometimes that might be, I'm just going to go and take 5 minute walk outside. I'm going to go and get myself a cup of tea. Sometimes it could be, I need to talk to a friend. I need to speak with someone. But that act of just pausing, this is a moment that is challenging, recognizing either because of the way we are with ourselves or what's happening in our life, and then asking, what would love do right now? And then being that for ourselves. If you can do that in your day, in many little moments, your whole relationship with yourself will change. It's a very simple, very beautiful way of beginning. So
It
I
is
hope that
beautiful.
helps. Mm,
Yeah. So as you were explaining this, I'm imagining, I was a teacher for 15 years and I have a child
mm,
too. And I was imagining, okay, what if, let's say, the child within us or a child themselves is like,
mm.
yeah, I just need to scream right now.
Yeah,
Like, is that, is
I love
that,
that. Is very much part of, there are moments in that time where I feel I'm afraid to do that. Pillow. It's very real, that need to times. It's an emotional reaction. And what's so tricky is so often we suppress that. We have things that we think are not acceptable and we suppress them. But when we suppress them, where do we put it? Inside ourselves. And then it's unprocessed. And energy, is emotion. Energy in motion is emotion. And so we need to let the emotion flow. So if you in that moment you feel that, I would suggest find a pillow, scream in it. I often, if I'm feeling like that, I'm lucky I live by the sea, I'll go and I'll scream underwater. It's very powerful.
wow,
Or if you can't scream, you can also cover your mouth with your hands and you can do a silent scream into your mouth, into your hands rather. But you can also just move. You can move, like you can shake, you can stamp, you can jump, you can put on a song and you can just you can just release it. And
ah,
that's true in many different ways. If you're feeling sad, like putting on some music that helps you feel that and moving, like letting yourself be a space where that emotion, like a river, can actually flow through you. And what's extraordinary is, in even the most challenging emotions, if we let them flow, actually they don't last that long. If we
yes.
suppress them, then the basement gets full pretty quickly of all the things we've pushed away, and then
Mhm.
we're carrying them with us. So how would it be from now on if we try to let those emotions actually flow, and then they can transmute and transform into something else rather than being suppressed within us? So
I
yeah,
love that. Great.
everyone grab your pillows and scream into them. Give it a try. It's very powerful. And again, what's powerful is the fact that you've listened to yourself and you've named what you need. Actually, that's a really important part of the process. Like, hold on, I'm feeling this. I need this. What can I do? Already, that is very powerful.
Love it. Amazing. Wow. Okay, so tell us, where can people find you and find more about you, how to work with you, all the deets.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So people can find me at www.soulshinewithsula.com, or they can find me on Instagram at soulshine_Sula. So Soulshine is, the name of my retreat company and the methodology I work with. And those are probably the easiest ways to find me and to connect with all the resources I have. I have a 7 day to self-compassion program as well, which is free to anyone who joins my community. You get 7 days of self-compassion practices. So I definitely recommend coming over and saying hi. And I always love to hear from anyone who's joining and curious. So feel free to email me or DM
Oh,
me.
that's
Yeah.
lovely. Thank you. And I'll put all of the information in the notes. So if you're driving or just listening to this or you didn't get it, just
Yeah.
go into the notes and you'll find all of Sula's information there.
And if you're driving, just to say one thing there, that's another great time to scream as well. Doing it safely. Safety first, of course, but driving in your car is a great time to let off emotions. You just reminded me.
I have actually done that.
Yeah, me too. I probably scared some people driving around me, but it helped me feel much better. So,
Yeah, to me, it feels like the safest place because it's like I'm moving. So I'm like screaming, but
yeah,
I'm moving.
yeah.
No
I
one
love
can stare at
that.
me.
Let's start a movement of people screaming in our cars, not at other people, but just generally.
Yeah, I love that. Well,
Mm.
Sula, is there anything we didn't touch on that you would like to share or add to the audience?
No, I think that's it now. Just to let everyone know that wherever you are, just finding your way back to really knowing that you have always been enough and you're worthy of all the love and all the freedom and all the joy. So trust in that and follow your path.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story on healing through you, and I
Mm.
will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.